let's move onward. Um, Elizabeth Bundred-Woodward, Planning Policy Lead at National CPRE with Brad Taylor, Rural Policy and Campaigns Officer at National CPRE. I'm a beneficiary in Parliament of the good work of the CPRE. We get great briefings. Your national gang really does you proud, really useful when you're trying to table amendments and get some real evidence together. So it's up to you two to fight it out as to who speaks first or last. Brad, are you gonna start us off?
Yeah, I think I am actually. So, afternoon,
Brilliant.
everybody. Yeah, so Lizzie and I are just sort of going to run through sort of rural affordable housing from the report that we wrote and published together in November and go through some of the detail that's more targeted to the Southwest and then to Dorset as well. So the first slide I'm going to jump through in a minute. Next slide. Is rural homelessness. So in the report, generally across England, rural homelessness has increased by 40%. And then in the table below, I can only go back to 2018, 2019, because the way that the government counted homelessness changed. And this is looking at statutory homelessness, so where relief duty is owed to these people. So as you can see, I've kept the breakdown of North Dorset, Purbeck, and West Dorset, which joined together to become Dorset Local Authority. So that explains the little Zs because that was non-existent. So just looking at the picture of the Southwest, homelessness in the whole of the Southwest, urban and rural, has increased 47%, going from 10,225 up to 15,032. And that's over like a 4-5 year period. It's increased that much, which is quite rapid. And then looking at rural homelessness, specifically just in the Southwest, it has gone from 3,671 up to 5,899, which is a 61% increase, which is above the rural average of 40%. So there is an element of a crisis going on in Dorset, in the rural areas, that maybe will often be hidden because it may be people that are sofa surfing. It's not rough sleeping of people that you would see. It's people that might be sleeping in outbuildings or in caravans that don't have an address tied to their name. So not yet.
Sorry.
No. So then again, going back to the specific picture of Dorset as a whole, there's actually been a 135% increase from 2018 to 2023. You can take a slight caveat with that because it was 3 different authorities that have now come into one. But looking at the data that's available from the DLUC government website, this is the case. So it's gone up 135% just in Dorset. So that's obviously a lot higher than the regional average of the Southwest as well. Moving on to social housing waiting list. There has been, it seems like Dorset and the Southwest have been on a journey in the delivery of social housing. It started off quite high and then it sort of tailed off around the mid part of the 2010s. And it's actually gradually having a slight increase. You know, in 2023, 73,000, just over 73,000 were built, which isn't too far off the 2010 levels. It's still a bit below. It did increase after 2010. I think the peak was in 2013 when 120,000 social people were on the social housing waiting list. So it has gone down, but it is creeping up again. So that is a slight concern, especially when you start to look at the increase of social housing waiting list of homelessness. There is parallels to be drawn between the two. Next slide, please. And then this is the breakdown of the people in social housing waiting list in Dorset. Again, the Zs denote it did not exist or no longer exists. So I've got the breakdown of the local authorities, all of them, and then looking at what we have in 2023. So it started off, if my calculations are correct, that there was just over 11,000 people on a social housing waiting list, which is now down to just under 4,500. So there has been an improvement. There is people coming off the social housing waiting list. It did have a peak. It has come down, but then there is an increase in rural homelessness. So there is issues around there and Lizzie will go into it a bit more later, but painting the picture is quite complex of what's going on in the southwest and Dorset, but Dorset seems to be moving in the right direction of decreasing the amount of people that are on a social housing waiting list. Next slide, please. This map is taken from Action on Empty Homes. They released a report maybe a month ago, and it was looking at low use properties. So the yellow and low use properties is sort of like our holiday homes we're starting to look at here, or second homes. And the yellow denote where there is a lot more low use properties. So as you can see, a lot of Dorset is being covered by second homes or empty homes for a large portion of the year. In the table along the top, we can see that there is nearly 16,000 low use homes. So that's second home, short-term lets, out of the total of 181,000 homes, and that equates to 9% of all homes in Dorset are empty for large parts of the year, are second homes or short-term lets. So that's not helping the affordability crisis, because lots of these homes are being bought that then are empty, and you can see in large parts of Dorset, even in the more built-up areas, there's still a lot of empty properties. There's pockets where it's fuller, but there's still a large amount. And then I've also included the average price of the low use homes, which is about £20,000 more than the average price of another home in Dorset. So there is a disparity between there. Also looking through the Action on Empty Homes data more, all of this on their report, all of the data is available for free download. And they had a section, and Dorset as a local authority is ranked 12th out of all of the UK. So this is England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, of having the most low use homes. So it's really quite a problem there, especially when we're looking at the amount of homelessness, the house price, people on the social housing waiting list. It's really starting to paint a picture that there's quite a lot going on that is impeding people being able to live in a home.
Thanks, Brad. So given that current context, we also within the report had a look at what existing policies are in place, the impact they're having, specifically what might be working quite well in Dorset, as Brad said, waiting lists have come down, and also what's not working. So initially, we took a look at rural exception sites. Some of you will be familiar. For those not, rural exception sites tend to be small sites located on the edge of rural settlements, and they enable land to be provided for below market housing. And usually that housing has to be provided for local people, so it meets a demonstrable need. A lot of local plans will include a policy, and there is actually a policy within the National Planning Policy Framework relating to rural exception sites. As seen on the map, the number of affordable homes delivered on rural exception sites in Dorset over the 5-year period actually is quite low compared to neighbouring counties. Cornwall, for instance, has delivered quite a number of affordable homes. There is some guidance available locally. So Purbeck Council have a local plan and guidance relating to rural exception sites, and indeed they have a checklist for affordable homes to be delivered. So there have been some successes, and as Lord Best mentioned, those 9 affordable homes in Powerstock were actually delivered using rural exception site policy. So success. However, we found both in Dorset and across rural England that actually rural exception sites could be better utilised. And further research undertaken by UCL and English Rural more recently has reiterated our findings. we found that rural housing enablers often report that grant funding is limited and often restricted. So, for example, in some areas, smaller market homes are needed to enable people living within the village to downsize and to free up larger family homes. But rural exception site funding currently cannot be used to provide this. Further, the funding is provided by DEFRA, but the planning policy is delivered by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. So there's a bit of a lack of joined up, which is the problem as set out on the slide. So we found that take-up is limited and funding has been sporadic. So therefore, we would like to see a more joined up approach to policy and funding, and greater acknowledgement in national policy of the role that rural exception sites can play in delivering rural affordable homes, including social homes. There has been some successes in the most recent update to the National Planning Policy Framework, or NPPF. There were some changes, however, funding is still sporadic and ring-fenced by DEFRA, and also critically not linked to planning policy. Moving on, Section 157 restrictions were introduced to enable local authorities to prevent the sale of social homes and keep them in their areas. And I believe it was Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, recently stated that right to buy is like trying to fill a bath up with the plug out. You know, even if you're building more social homes, if you're selling them, you're not increasing your stock. So we had a look at the use of Section 157 across rural England. And our research is actually the first of its kind. So I would urge everybody to please have a look at the report and the map in particular. We found that there has been a real significant gap in the application of Section 157, and particularly within Dorset, as shown on the map here. Part of that is due to the large swathes of designations where restrictions were already in places, so national parks or AONB, for example. But also we can see that there are gaps outside of the built-up areas, and we found that, as I say, there are gaps across rural England. So the answer to that, we would like to see Section 157 restrictions extended, particularly to smaller parishes of below 3,000. As well as some of those larger areas where there are particular housing pressures. And at the minute, there's been no real movement on Section 157, unfortunately. Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, as it's referred to in Section 106 agreements or planning obligations, have been brought in to capture land value uplift and really return some public benefits rather than putting more money in developer pockets. The regime has drawn quite a lot of criticism, but has been fairly effective in delivering affordable housing, particularly via Section 106 commitments. However, we have found that commitments don't always align with delivery, i.e., and as previous speakers have said, perhaps promises of affordable homes at planning aren't actually delivered in the end, and this twin track regime can also be quite confusing. So our answer to this is we would like to see an increase in actual minimum targets for affordable housing to set that. Oh. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. To set affordable housing standards in national policy so that the developers can't wriggle out of those commitments towards the end. And also ensure that affordable housing can be delivered via the Community Infrastructure Levy regime, which it can't currently. The government response to this has been that they have proposed a new infrastructure, or IL, doesn't sound too good, regime through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act last year, but no promise around social housing targets or to increase the current target, which is 10% in the National Planning Policy Framework. And as Lord Best said, CPRE have been a bit of a market leader in looking at short-term rentals. Our research in 2021 drew quite a lot of interest, as we found that there's been 1,000% increase in homes listed for short-term lets across rural England, which has squeezed rural areas particularly, and particularly in touristy hotspots like areas like Dorset. We've consistently been calling for a new planning use class and also a register for short-term rentals, which is actually supported within the sector. So big players like Airbnb are actually very supportive of a register. There has again been some movement, as Lord Best indicated. The spring budget, Jeremy Hunt included a proposal for a new planning use class order for short-term lets, and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act that was implemented last year does set a requirement for the government to implement a register. However, neither have yet been implemented, and obviously we're now at general election stage, so we would like to see any future government bring those two items into force. Pass back over to Brad.
So now I'm going to speak a bit about the Affordable Housing Pledge and the campaign that we launched following the publication of the report. So in March, we launched the Affordable Housing Campaign, where we're sort of taking up all of the recommendations from the report and trying to implement like better ideas into policy. So I think at the minute we've had just over 7,000 people sign our hand raiser, so they've got on a supported journey with us. But what we wanted to do ahead of the local elections, but also now as we're in a general election period and moving forward, is we developed a rural affordable housing pledge, which is basically to get local councillors, MPs, lords, groupings of political parties to sign our pledge, which we've got the commitment underneath, which is sort of some of our recommendations, which is to advocate for the redefinition of affordable housing to ensure it directly reflects average local incomes. So that was one of the recommendations from the presentation earlier. Calling for new targets for new and generally affordable homes in rural areas to meet locally assessed need. Also links with the standard methodology thing of the earlier presentations. Calling for hope value to be abolished and reduce the market value of land and increasing the viability of social housing delivery. One of the big takeaways from the report and probably from this presentation, and all of the presentations, is that we need more social homes and generally affordable homes. It's not a market home crisis, it's an affordable social home crisis. And then, as Lizzie just said about initiatives to tackle the issues around short-term lets and second homes. So the registration, I think, would be a great start, because we can sort of see how many homes there are, where the homes are, because we have to be conscious of the rural economy and we don't want to damage that, but we also don't want people to not be able to live where they want to live. So in this pledge, so far we've had 21, so the uptake is going slowly but surely. So we've had two councillors from Dorset have signed. So we've had a councillor, John Andrews, of the Liberal Democrat group, and a councillor, Chris Kippax, also of the Liberal Democrat group. And we've also had the West Dorset Conservatives and the Sherborne Conservatives as a grouping have signed onto the pledge as well, which is really positive in whatever government we have next, is that we're getting support for what we're calling for, and the rural voice is being heard. And we want to make sure that we continue to be heard so that we can get the right homes to be built in the right place for the right people, and it's not more market homes. So that's part of the campaign. The campaign is ongoing. It will still be ongoing. We've had lots of case studies of different people's views around affordable and social homes and what it means to them, because we're really trying to drill home that point to new politicians and current ones at all different levels, that affordable homes and social homes are really, really, really important. And that's the main message of the campaign.
Thanks, Brad. It will come to no surprise to everyone at this call that we are in the middle of a general election campaign. And given our campaign pledges, we thought we would do a bit of a sort of review of the manifestos that have been launched so far, and double check our sort of campaign asks against the manifesto targets, and come up with some potential challenges or opportunities. Actually, it's far more positive than we thought, and rural housing, and particularly social housing, has been something that's been picked up, I think, by all of the parties, with particular parties focusing on hope value. So Labour Liberal Democrats and the Greens have talked about reforming hope value. We know that the Conservatives in the previous government had already looked at reforming hope value through the Land Compensation Act. Both the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats have also talked about encouraging use of rural exception sites, which is really positive. And both Labour and the Greens have talked about delivering more social homes more generally. But of course, we are CPRE, so we'd like to see more championing of rural homes, particularly rural affordable homes, and championing of planning and community support. I'll leave that there. Richard, back to you. Thank you.
Back to me. Well, thank you both very much for that. We've got a little bit of time. Let me just press you on one or two points. Bringing, as you do, the expertise of National CPRE to our event. Yes, all the speakers have pointed in a similar direction here, namely that leaving things to the house builders, the volume house builders in particular, is not going to produce the affordable housing that we want. They've consistently let us down in terms of the amount of affordable housing they promise but don't deliver. They don't always produce the quality, and they certainly don't always build out the sites for which they've got consent, leaving big problems behind them. So this points to others having to pick up the pieces and do the affordable housing that we need, and that means not just the registered providers, the housing associations, but also where the local authority is up for it, the council itself taking a hand in this. And I gather that Dorset is in for becoming or has already become a registered provider itself, and is up for direct development, which will undoubtedly be a real extra resource for the county. There were a couple of things that came out of your presentation, Elizabeth and Brad, that I just wanted to quiz a bit more. Just my own ignorance, no doubt. But you talked about the twin track regime slowing things down and being a problem. Can you just explain the twin track regime a bit more?
Sure, yeah, so that's Community Infrastructure Levy, so CIL, which most councils have adopted. There are gaps, so you can only adopt CIL if you have an adopted local plan, which is a bit of an issue. So there are councils that are already losing out. And then obviously Section 106, which is a legal agreement that the council sign with the developer. So Section 106 currently is the delivery mechanism for trying to tie developers down to their affordable housing commitments. But as we know, that developers will provide these viability assessments and then further down the line say, oh, well, actually we can't afford to meet that commitment, which is why we're asking for higher targets in planning policy. Also community infrastructure at the minute, community infrastructure levy is used for things like parks or schools or road improvements, but it can't actually be used for affordable housing at the moment. The current infrastructure levy regime has proposed to use those funds and monies for affordable housing. So we'll see whether that's implemented and what impacts that then has on Section 106 and how those two regimes interact with one another. We also know at the moment that local authorities sometimes struggle to spend community infrastructure levy funds and monies, and also neighbourhood planning groups or neighbourhood forums are also eligible to use community infrastructure levy funds. So we'll wait and see essentially how that works out, but it's fairly complex at the moment. And I suspect the new regime isn't necessarily going to reduce the amount of complexity. I
think I'll put my head on the block here, but I don't think we're going to see much of the infrastructure levy. Labour opposed it in the Lords when we had the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and I doubt whether they're going to implement any part of it not yet already on the statute book. It's not going to translate into practice. frankly, if Labour wins, which seems to be likely, then it's goodbye to the infrastructure levy. And we're stuck then, and we may need to reform it in other ways with Section 106 and the community infrastructure levy, those two. But thanks for that. And I had one more, as we've got a little bit of time to keep you on your toes there from National HQ. Hope value. You're still pressing for measures that would reduce the price of land back to something nearer its current value. And other people have congratulated the government on already making serious inroads into the difficulties currently created for compulsory purchase of land by the presence of hope value. Have we not made some rather good progress already on this with the current administration? And what more needs to be done? It seems unlikely that this basis for valuing property that's going to be compulsorily purchased, that is not going to get past the International Court of Human Rights if it is simply you can only receive a paltry sum compared with what you were expecting. But that total removal of any increase in value that's attributable to the fact that the land may be developed, that may not be on the cards, but something halfway toward that, which would dramatically reduce the cost of land, that does seem now to be possible. Do you need to press for more? How satisfied are you with what's gone into legislation already, just recently, not yet implemented, but on now ready to go?
Yeah. Should I pick them and you want to jump in at the end if I miss anything off? Absolutely. The previous government in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, they suggested community land auctions. So that is a form of reforming hope value through the Land Compensation Act, as you say, not yet implemented, which is seems to be the critical sentence today. However, it doesn't go as far as we would like it. And the reason for that is currently councils have to apply to the Secretary of State to remove hope value if they want to compulsorily purchase land to deliver affordable housing. We think that just creates an unnecessary barrier, and really we should just abolish hope value altogether so that councils can CPO sites and bring back some of that land value uplift and either deliver more homes or use those additional monies to deliver other public benefits, whatever they may be, green spaces, etc. So we would just like them to go that little bit step further, I would say.
And in the manifestos, have any of the parties said that they'll do that, or indeed that they'll simply make it unnecessary to get the permission of the Secretary of State before a council could proceed?
Yes, so Labour have said that they would be looking to abolish hope value, and I understand that compulsory purchase is going to be a sort of a big part of their proposed New Towns programme. Detail on that waits to be seen. The Liberal Democrats seem to be proposing a continuation of the previous government's community land auction scheme. But hope value definitely has caught the attention, I would say, of all the major parties and was included in all of the manifestos.
Could make a very significant difference to the amount of affordable housing, because it dramatically reduces the cost of land, which is such a big component. Yeah, great stuff. Well, that's really helpful. Other people want to come in at this stage? Please quiz our experts. Before we think about a break for tea. Heidi, you were going to introduce a question that we've already received. You're on mute.
My apologies. Paul had just had his hand up, so I don't know if Paul wanted to come in with a question before I start with questions from the audience.
Excellent. Paul.
The only bit I just was this might be a time in the chat. I've seen some comment about our waiting list numbers and whether they are coming down, as Elizabeth and Brad suggested. Sadly, it's not quite so positive as that. Unfortunately, they are going back up, they came down when Dorset Council became a unitary. We merged 5 councils into one. We did our housing register, went through a renewal process that meant the numbers came down. Unfortunately, they're now going up at an alarming rate. So there was just, the numbers are in my slide, but I just saw a couple of questions, so I thought I would just mention that.
It did look to me improbable that you'd had this dramatic fall. And housing waiting lists are not the best barometer of need, I think. What really counts is the number of people who end up in temporary accommodation because there's just nowhere else to go. And that marker, I think, is a very alarming one. But thank you for that intervention, Paul. Heidi, shall we do 1 or 2 questions before the tea break?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good idea. We've had a question from Andrew Proctor, who's chair of the Dorset CPRE Planning Committee, and he's asked, should we now consider abandoning both the flawed standard method and also the problematical viability assessment and separate the future delivery mechanism of private social housing? The private sector can deliver within market conditions, and the public sector can then assume the full responsibility of delivering the 4 million homes which Quinton says is needed. The current system needs fixing as soon as possible.
Yes. Anybody want to come back on that one?
I wonder, as Quinton very ably ran through standard method, or might you don't want to hog the mic, as it were, if you guys have thoughts.
Quinton, did you want to?
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Lord Best. So the standard method is working to allocate land largely for market house building. So 80% of all the land allocated in this country is going for full price housing. And the question I was raising is that really the priority? Is that where we want land to go? Because it's a scarce resource. And we have no mechanism for allocating land only for affordable housing or social housing, whichever terms we want to use. So there's basically a competition between developers, housing associations, community land trusts, for who can bid the most for land. And, you know, in most circumstances, the person with the most money will get the land. So is the standard method working? Is it really delivering the goals that our society needs, that Dorset needs? And the answer is, you know, you can take the answer in different stages. You can analyze the standard method and its workings, and that's when we do that, you know, we show, you know, all the false assumptions that are built into that, and some of them are out in the open. You know, why are we taking 2014 figures, etc., etc.? Why has it got an affordability formula? Why that affordability formula? All those questions can be asked. But I think that's not the main question. The main question is this what we should be putting our priorities into? Because as Mike said, we have a very efficient industry delivering market housing. They're really good at their job. There's no messing around there. And they have vast land supply pipelines. So, you know, the top 3 house builders have 6 years worth of land with full planning permission or outline planning permission ready to go. So is it the priority for local planning authorities to find more land for those house builders? Because they're actually quite good at finding their own land. And then they can put in a planning application. And then the local planning authority can consider whether that application meets local needs. So the local planning authority shouldn't be spending all its time allocating land for the house builders. They can do their own job, can't they? The local planning authority, the real job of them is to allocate land to meet a housing need, to meet affordable housing need, because that's what we're not doing. So yes, let's get rid of the standard method. We don't need a method for allocating land for market house builders. They can do it themselves. We need a method for allocating land for social housing, for affordable housing, however we define that, and let's redefine it to mean really affordable. Thanks.
Very, very good. Just to tell you in Devon that we're looking at the opportunities for a development corporation, which would be wholly owned by Devon's local authorities, but which would do its own acquisition of sites, assembly of land, purchase, if necessary, using the CPO powers that we're all talking about, but then allocate, parcel out the sites within a master plan to the different kinds of builders, developers, to the housing associations, CLTs, student housing, older people's housing, whatever it is, but with the development corporation at the center of that. I think this may be a model which Dorset is exploring in the context of being a registered provider itself. If you've got 11 local authorities, as we have 11 planning authorities in Devon, it's a different way of looking at the approach than if you have one, as you do in Dorset, apart from the Bournemouth Christchurch pool. But a development corporation model may be the way to do what Quinton is hoping we would introduce. Other people. Heidi, were you just going to go through a question? I see.
Could I just add something to the discussion, please, Lord Bess?
Yes, please.
If I could share my screen, is that showing?
I
sorry.
didn't see.
There we go. The Competition and Markets Authority looked at housing provision recently, and their report came up with a quote I've put here, which I find fascinating and insightful. They said a competitive private market will not, on its own initiative, produce sufficient housing to meet overall housing need. The cost of private sector housing and the level and distribution of incomes and assets means that significant numbers of households lack the resources to be able to afford adequate housing on the private market. In addition, the wider benefits, and this is the interesting part, the wider benefits of housing availability and conditions, such as health outcomes, education attainment, and productivity, are not captured by private actors in the market, house builders and landowners, as profit. This means that the private market will not, on its own initiative, produce sufficient housing to meet overall housing need, even if it is highly competitive. And what they're saying is economically, it just won't happen because there is no profit identification in real housing need. Housing need does not lead to profit. The private market will not provide it. It won't happen. And I think coming from someone as independent as the CMA, that's really fascinating. And I think Andrew's point that we're discussing, that should the two be separated, should private housing provision be separate to the provision of housing need, I think is a salient point, because it just won't happen. It's not that one approach is better than the other. There is no way forward through the private market, and that's what's been happening now for a long time. And surely the evidence is there that we're not going to build 300,000 houses through the private market. It's not going to occur. Yeah, enough said. CMA.
Yeah, no, it was an impressive contribution. They also picked up on Sir Oliver Letwin's earlier Letwin review of 2018, which said much the same. They really endorsed his report. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Mike. Now I see that Alison has joined us on the screen. I see your name there, Alison, and you'll be talking to us later in the afternoon. There you are. Welcome, joining the panel of speakers. I think you're just in time for the tea break. Perhaps Heidi, shall we adjourn a few minutes, 3 minutes early, and reconvene again at 3:15? Would that be right? Okay, let's go and make ourselves a cup of tea. Thanks, everybody.